In today's video, I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favorite upgrades here on the NoBo 10.6. Yep, you guessed it, it is the faucet mod. I'm going to show you from start to finish how to complete this upgrade. And even if you don't have a NoBo 10.6, the process that I'm going to outline is basically the same for any rig. So don't go anywhere. Now, if you own a NoBo 10.6 or the 10.5, you know that it comes with a handy spray port here off to the side and a sink basin. And these are great. They're super handy, allows you to spray water just like a garden hose wherever you're camping. But there's only one downside to this. You have to pretty much have one hand on the spray port, and that leaves you with only one free hand to do your business. That's where this mod really shines, as it gives you a faucet just like you have in your kitchen. For me, this was a must-have feature. I mean, think about it. Now you've got a sink just like you have in your kitchen. Whether you're washing your hands, you've got both hands free. Whether you're rinsing some fruit or fresh veggies, or just maybe filling up a bottle. And that's what makes this one of my favorite upgrades here on the NoBo 10.6. And I hope one day if Forest River is watching these videos that they will add this as a standard feature into their rigs. I think it'd be pretty simple and straightforward to add into the production, and it adds a tremendous amount of functionality and value to the end user. Now, this mod took me a couple hours initially to complete, so let me give you the full scoop. First up, let me walk you through how the water goes from your water source, whether it's the city water connection here or your tank, all the way to the faucet over here. And in case you're wondering, I did not run a dedicated line to the faucet. In fact, I used less than 12 inches of pipe to make this mod work. You probably know that if you're connected to city water at your campsite through the outside port here, that pipe travels directly inside the rig here on the opposite side of the wall in the back of the kitchen slide area. Now, if you're seeing the water filter here in the PRV and you're wondering if that comes standard on the NoBo, no, it does not, but that is another mod I did, and if you haven't seen the video on that one, I'll put a link in the description below. But back to tracing the water. Down below here, you've got the freshwater tank, which runs up to the water pump just above here. And then these two lines, the city water inlet and the pump outlet, eventually tee together, and then they feed the spray port on the outside of the rig here. Now, just for a moment, pretend that you've got x-ray vision, and I'll trace the pipe along this wall so you can kind of get an idea of where it runs. So it goes straight out here from the water pump and begins to come to the outside of the rig, and then it starts to curve upwards like this. And it curves all the way up, and then it goes up through the cabin to the water spray port right here on the inside. Let me show you from the inside storage where that water pipe comes out. You can see it goes right up there and then elbows into the spray port. So remember, that existing water line runs behind this wall and kind of curves up here. And so getting water then to the faucet is as easy as teeing off of that existing water line, a couple elbows and some pipe, and you've got water here in the pantry running to that faucet. Pretty simple, right? And this works off of city water or the water pump, just like your existing spray port. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why don't you show us what it looks like behind the panel here, right? And in hindsight, I wish I had taken some pics when I did this mod about a year ago, but I did not. And taking this panel off, it's fairly easy, but it's not something you want to do again and again because it's stapled, and it does have this adhesive strip covering the seam. But let me walk you through just how easy it is to get access behind here, and I think with a little imagination, you'll figure it out just fine. First, I went ahead and removed all these switches, the control panel, and the outlets just to make it easy to get that panel off. Most of them you can undo the screws and then slide it through the opening. Some of them you do have to disconnect the wires on the back side, but don't worry, it's just real simple blade style connectors, so you can just wiggle them off. Just be sure to take a picture before you disconnect everything so you know how to put it back together. Now, this panel on the wall itself, it's Luan with some wallpaper on it, and this stuff is really common in the RV industry. They use it on interior walls almost in every RV on the market, and it's kind of like drywall in your house, and then it's in 4x8 sheets, and so when they seam it together, if you can see here, there's a seam, and it's basically just an adhesive strip of tape that matches the wallpaper. So the next step is to very carefully remove that seam tape on that particular panel. And you can do that just by starting at the top or bottom and very carefully pull it off. It's very sticky, it's got a lot of adhesive on it, so if you're careful and you set it aside, you can reuse it there just like I've done here. Now, on a side note, I do have a seam right here on mine, just to the right of the control panel. Depending on when your rig was made, it's possible that it was put together a little bit differently. But again, my seam is right here, so regardless of whether you have a seam there or maybe you've got a continuous sheet, the process for removing is going to be basically the same. Now you can really see here along the top how they just use staples to fasten the luan to the wooden structure, the wooden frame behind it there. So you'll just carefully remove those staples and get that luan panel loose. Sometimes the staples actually kind of break through the luan, and so you'll have to pull the staples out later, and that's okay because I'll show you how you can reattach it easily after you're all done. So once you get that panel removed, you're going to see a lot of wires back here. It's going to look like spaghetti junction, but there's only one PEX water line that's running through this back wall. Before you tee into that water line, we're going to drill the holes that accommodate this faucet. I figure if I draw it out, you'll be able to see all this a little bit better. So right here we've got our new faucet, and coming out of that is a 1/2-inch threaded elbow, and you can see that right up here. That is that 1/2-inch threaded elbow that threads directly to the faucet base there. And then from that elbow it goes through the wall here, and so that is through this wall, and then it goes to another elbow, and that is back just behind here, behind this luan. And then from that elbow, just a short little jump over to the T where we're teeing into our existing water line. And so this is this existing water line behind the wall. This goes back to the water pump area in the back of the kitchen slide, and then that water line goes up to the spray port, which feeds right up here. And so we're basically just using 3 different fittings. We've got our threaded elbow here, and then a standard slip elbow, and then a 3-way T. Now for drilling the holes, you'll want to drill the hole for the faucet first here, because that'll dictate where your hole is for the pipe that goes through this wall and connects in through the T. Now drilling that hole for the faucet was a little tricky. I was using a standard drill just like this one here, and you can see because of the shelf above, you can't really go at it perpendicular, and so the tendency is that drill is going to want to dance around a little bit. So what I did is I went ahead and did a pilot hole first there for the faucet hole, and then used the bigger drill to drill at an angle and round it out real smoothly. So just take your time on that one. Now if you have a right angle drill, or you know someone that has one, I would definitely recommend borrowing it, because that would have made this a lot easier to be able to drill perpendicular right through this shelf for that faucet hole. Once you get that faucet hole drilled out, you can go ahead and test fit everything and put in that right angle fitting, and that will give you an idea of where you need to drill this hole going through the pantry wall that leads all the way to the other side here. Now before I go any further, let me touch briefly on these PEX fittings, these little crimp rings that go around the elbows in the pipes. Now if you haven't watched my other video on the water filter and the PRV upgrade, definitely check it out, because I did a detailed close-up guide on how to do these Apollo style crimp rings for PEX. And I'll put a link above and also one in the description below. But they're probably one of the easiest PEX fittings to use, and once you practice once or twice, you'll be a pro on them. That being said, here you can see that I used a right angle threaded fitting here. So this threaded fitting screws directly to the faucet and then goes into this elbow, which is all one piece, and then it slides into this 1/2-inch PEX line with the crimp ring around it. And then on the opposite side of this wall, there's another elbow and then a 3-way T that connects into that existing PEX line, and they all have that same crimp ring around them. Then for drilling the holes, I used a 3/4 inch bit, and that's for the 1/2-inch PEX line. I think the 1/2-inch PEX is about 5/8 outer diameter, and so that gives you just a little bit of play here using a 3/4 inch bit. And again, I drilled a pilot hole from the pantry side over here and went all the way through to the opposite side, and then I took my big 3/4 inch drill and went all the way through on both sides and married them together. Now PEX does have a little bit of flex to it, so if you're off just a little bit on your holes, it's not a problem. It's not rigid like copper, so you do have a little bit of flex there in your PEX line. Once you get all your holes drilled, then you can go ahead and dry fit everything. So you'll go ahead and put your threaded elbow here, attach it to the PEX, and then wherever it comes out on this side, you're going to do another hard 90-degree elbow, and that'll get you so you're perpendicular into that existing water line, so you can mark out where you're going to tee in. To tee in, you can use a standard cutter just like this one here. Make sure you got a towel handy in case you've got some water in that line, and that way the towel will catch it so water won't go everywhere. Basically just take your time to make sure all the connections are pointed in the right direction and that your pipe is the right length. And then when you're all done, you're going to take the Apollo crimping tool to crimp all those rings and make them watertight. Now before you go put everything back together, I recommend connecting your water to the city inlet and testing just to make sure there's no leaks. Once you're satisfied, it's just a matter of reassembling everything. As far as the wall panel, there's several options to reattach that. You probably saw Forest River uses some staples, and if you have any of those still in the framing, you'll want to take those out beforehand. But you can also use a brad nailer, and that's what I did. I just took some 3/4 inch brads and used those to nail the panel back together. I did put just a little bit of carpenter glue on the frame members just to hold everything in place. You could probably also use some screws to reattach everything if you don't mind seeing screws visible when you're all done. Then of course you'll reattach all the electrical switches in the control panel, and once everything has been tested and is working, then you'll do that last step and reattach that seam tape all the way down. Remember, that seam tape is not something you want to keep pulling off and putting back on because it is adhesive. So always do that last, only when you know you're done needing access back behind this wall. Now let me talk about just a few other considerations for this mod in particular. The first is this pantry space was not intended to get wet originally. And granted, when you use this faucet, it should always be pointed out here and not rotated inside the pantry space. But what if a little water splashes back in here? And so you can see what I did here is take some silicone and went all along the edge, the perimeter of this shelf. In case any water does get here, I didn't want it to be rolling down this shelf onto the shelf below. So definitely get some good high quality silicone. Take your time, go all along the perimeter here. I also went below here on the next shelf down and siliconed in the corners, because when this pantry space was fabricated, it was basically made out of a single piece of steel that was just bent. And so there are some tiny little holes that are in the corners, so go ahead and silicone those as well. And then I also tried to silicone all along the edges inside here of where that pantry compartment meets to the wall. And that way, if any water does happen to slip behind here or on the shelves, it's not going to be running into your rig or running into the walls. The other consideration is, once you have this nice faucet here, what about a drain on your basin, right? So the basin that they give you, you're just supposed to basically lift it out, dump it, and then it's empty, and then you can use it again. So what about adding a drain into this basin, and maybe it drains into a jerry can below or a gray tank? And that's certainly an option. That's something that I thought about. I started thinking about my renters and such and the added complexity of having a drain and a jerry can to set up, and I really was concerned that it might be too confusing for some renters or really become a hassle, you know, of sanitizing between them. And so I decided to forego the drain and just really keep it simple here. But I think it's still worth an idea exploring. You know, those types of drains and containers are readily available. So let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd rather just dump the basin when needed, or if you'd prefer having a drain and a jerry can. I think I only had one renter comment that he would have liked to have a gray tank and a drain here on the rig, mainly out of concern for the campground policy where he was staying, where they said you weren't allowed to dump gray water on the campsites. I think that's really more intended for RVs with actual gray tanks, but nonetheless, I can understand the concern there. So let me know what you think in the comments. All right, last consideration. Again, this pantry compartment is not really intended for water or moisture. It's really just for dry goods. And so you can see here along the edges especially, some of the paint is starting to flake off. A little bit of surface rust there. And then here on the actual shelf where the faucet's mounted, you can see there's a good bit of rust there developing in the back. Now I plan to sand all this down and repaint it. It's not that hard to do, right? But that is another side effect of adding a faucet here. You're going to expose all this to moisture, and it's really not designed to have that moisture in there in the first place. I am curious, those who are watching, is there another coating you can think of that I could try here on this inside of the pantry compartment? I even thought of trying some of that bed liner material that you roll on, you know, and it has that textured finish and it kind of coats everything in a single coating, seamless all the way around. So I thought about doing that, but I'm just not sure that that rough coating is going to be any easier to clean. So if you've got an idea of another coating that you're thinking about maybe doing on your rig, or something that you think would help here, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I think it would be incredibly helpful to the community for everybody watching. Now, one last thought I had on all this: what if Forest River revamped this storage here and used a 100% composite cabinet? And maybe even the sink would fold down from inside here. You know, I've seen some Euro style rigs that have sinks that fold up and down with the faucet, very similar to this one here in a wet bath. So maybe something could be fabricated that's entirely composite so that corrosion isn't an issue, and then the basin just kind of folds up into the cabinet. Now, I guess you'd lose some storage above there, but who knows? Again, let me know what you think, or if you have any more ideas on this one. Maybe Forest River will watch this one day and use it to improve future models. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you found it helpful. I will include affiliate links in the description below where you can buy the faucet featured in this video, along with some of the other smaller items needed. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about encouraging families to spend time together in the great outdoors, and I love to find ways to make the camping experience more enjoyable so you can spend more time with your family. And that's really what this channel is all about. There's going to be a lot of other videos coming up in this series on upgrades and mods that you definitely don't want to miss. So click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss one of the new videos. As always, thanks for watching.